Senhoras e senhores, então, bom dia, né? Nós iniciamos nesse momento a solenidade de abertura do 4º Seminário Internacional CIEspMat, com o tema Pesquisa e Formação de Professores para a Melhoria da Qualidade da Prática Matemática. É com muita alegria, então, que nós damos as boas-vindas a todos os presentes nesse seminário, no qual discutiremos aspectos relativamente à pesquisa e à formação do professor para a melhoria da prática matemática. Este evento ele é organizado pelo CIEspMat, Grupo de Pesquisa e Formação sobre Conhecimento Especializado e Interpretativo do Professor que Ensina Matemática, e ocorrerá durante praticamente todo o mês de outubro, iniciando hoje com encerramento no dia 28 deste mês. Teremos conferências e workshops às terças, quartas e quintas-feiras, de acordo com a programação já divulgada. Nós iniciamos, então, já agradecendo, né, a Faculdade de Educação da Unicamp, ao Instituto de Matemática, Estatística e Computação Científica da Unicamp, né, o IMEC, a Sociedade Brasileira de Educação Matemática, SBEM, e a Pró-Reitoria de Pesquisa da Unicamp. Também, já de início, agradecemos aos convidados que participarão das conferências, workshops e momentos jovens pesquisadores, pela disposição em estar conosco neste mês, e a todas e todos os demais participantes deste evento. Então, vou apresentar, né, as pessoas que estão aqui compondo a solenidade de abertura: o professor Dr. René Trentin Silveira, diretor da Faculdade de Educação da Unicamp; o professor Dr. Ricardo Miranda Martins, diretor associado do IMEC da Unicamp; professor Dr. Marcelo Bairral, presidente da Sociedade Brasileira de Educação Matemática, a SBEM; professor Dr. Samuel Rocha de Oliveira, coordenador do Laboratório de Ensino de Matemática do IMEC da Unicamp; e o professor Dr. Miguel Ribeiro, professor da Faculdade de Educação da Unicamp e coordenador do Grupo de Pesquisa e Formação sobre Conhecimento Especializado e Interpretativo do Professor que Ensina Matemática, o CIEspMat. Então, nós abrimos agora, né, os pronunciamentos para os nossos participantes aqui da abertura fazerem uso da palavra e dar boas-vindas aí, né, aos nossos participantes do evento. Então, nós iniciamos com a palavra do professor Dr. Miguel Ribeiro, da Faculdade de Educação e coordenador do CIEspMat.
Bom dia a todos. Eu vou tentar ser breve, até porque nós não podemos passar muito tempo sentados e ouvir, já estamos todos fartos de ouvir, passar muito tempo sentados até reuniões. Eu tenho que agradecer a participação de todos aqui nesta mesa virtual de abertura, de todos os que vão participar do seminário, todos os palestrantes, todos os dinamizadores dos workshops. Este 4º seminário forma parte de um conjunto de ações que temos vindo a desenvolver nos últimos 4 anos na perspectiva de contribuir para melhorar a qualidade da pesquisa e da formação, também no que está relacionado com essa coisa de que se deixe de dizer que o que fazemos na pesquisa não tem relação com as escolas, ou o que é muito comum na formação inicial, que o que aprendemos na formação inicial não tem nada a ver com a sala de aula. E, portanto, um dos objetivos do seminário e do trabalho que tem vindo a ser desenvolvido é que a formação se centre efetivamente onde é necessária, e essa necessidade está relacionada com as dimensões que efetivamente contribuem para a melhoria da prática, da melhoria da qualidade da prática matemática, para melhorar a qualidade das aprendizagens dos alunos e, como consequência disso, os resultados. Tudo isso associa-se, e eu digo sempre, tudo isso associa-se à necessidade de uma mudança de foco na formação de professores, se efetivamente queremos passar a formar professores. Isto não significa que não existe formação de professores, mas que existe a necessidade de que aquilo que nós fazemos efetivamente na formação de professores efetivamente tenha como ponto de partida a pesquisa que se desenvolve, e um dos aspectos essenciais dessa pesquisa, não o único, mas um dos aspectos essenciais dessa pesquisa está relacionado com o conhecimento do professor. Portanto, para que a formação não continue a ocorrer uma formação em que o foco principal é discutir as questões pedagógicas gerais, que é muito pouco, há muita pesquisa dos últimos 30 anos que mostra, que muito pouco contribuem para melhorar as aprendizagens dos alunos, ou por outro lado, isto na pedagogia, ou por outro lado, até aproveitando que temos aqui o diretor da Faculdade de Educação e o diretor associado do IMEC, por outro lado, que a formação de professores de matemática não continua a focar-se nessa matemática que alguns consideram que é mais avançada, mas sem a efetiva prática, a conexão com a prática futura. Portanto, com este seminário, aproveitando, e nós podemos sempre ver o copo meio cheio e meio vazio, mas para nós o importante é o que nós fazemos com isso. Portanto, neste seminário, aproveitando a oportunidade que esta questão do Covid-19 e da pandemia nos trouxe de estarmos todos longe, mas podermos estar todos perto, nós conseguimos juntar no seminário, ao longo do mês de outubro, alguns dos pesquisadores mais influentes a nível nacional e internacional. Seria praticamente impossível que isso ocorresse se tivéssemos que desenvolver o seminário presencial como seria o ideal, num contexto ideal. Portanto, tenho que agradecer a participação de todos os participantes, todos os dinamizadores, agradecer aos convidados que vão dinamizar as 14 palestras que vamos ter, aos jovens pesquisadores que vão participar no momento dos jovens pesquisadores, porque isso é algo essencial se efetivamente queremos pensar no futuro, queremos melhorar a qualidade daquilo que se vai fazer em um futuro próximo. E por último, quero agradecer ao Samuel Oliveira pela parceria com o LEM, neste movimento, efetivamente, de aproximar a educação matemática da matemática e de irmos construindo essas linguagens comuns para contribuir, efetivamente, de forma propositiva para a melhoria da qualidade da pesquisa, da formação e da prática. Portanto, espero que o seminário seja contributivo nesse sentido, não só para os professores, não só para os pesquisadores, mas também para nós que temos a responsabilidade dessa formação e desenvolver a pesquisa. E passa a ser uma pesquisa efetivamente conjunta e almejando a melhoria de todas essas dimensões. Obrigado.
Obrigada, professor Miguel, pela abertura, né? Agora eu passo, então, a palavra para o professor Dr. Samuel Rocha de Oliveira, que é professor do IMEC e coordenador do LEM.
Bom dia a todos. Primeiramente, eu quero parabenizar ao Miguel e ao CIEspMat pela organização desse seminário, mais esse seminário internacional, e agora com a programação talvez, eu acho, assim, inédita no tamanho e pela abertura com que vai ter gente literalmente todo mundo participando, aproveitando essa oportunidade. Nós temos de ter esse contato apenas de forma remota. Sinto falta dos abraços, dos beijinhos, mas a gente tem esse lado positivo também de trazer para uma tela gente de todos os lugares. O LEM tem oferecido cursos de formação continuada de professores de matemática por já algumas décadas, e essa aproximação com a pesquisa em educação matemática via o CIEspMat acho que vai ser produtiva, porque várias das nossas atuações junto aos professores usavam a experiência e apenas algumas coisas empíricas. Então, ao ter essa pesquisa da formação do professor e que a importância desse conhecimento interpretativo do professor na hora de ensinar matemática, eu acho que vai ter um ganho, uma sinergia muito grande com o nosso laboratório de ensino matemática para os futuros cursos que nós pretendemos fazer já com uma conexão maior com a Faculdade de Educação e com o CIEspMat. Então, para mim, primeiro é um prazer participar e, na medida do possível, ajudar a organizar o seminário e também ter essa conexão mais forte com o LEM para a gente é muito importante. Agradeço mais uma vez e bom seminário para todos nós.
Obrigada, professor Samuel, pelas suas palavras, né? A gente agradece as suas colocações. E, Fábio, agora a palavra para o professor Dr. Marcelo Bairral, que é presidente da SBEM. O professor está com o microfone desligado.
Bom dia a todas, a todos e todes. Gostaria de agradecer e parabenizar o professor Miguel e todo o grupo do CIEspMat por essa iniciativa, por esse sucesso de evento em momentos tão difíceis que passamos, né? Gostaria também de agradecer aos colegas da Unicamp por toda a acolhida e a todos os convidados que estarão aí presentes, brasileiros e estrangeiros, trazendo muitas contribuições nesse seminário. Ao cumprimentar também o professor Rogério Marques, diretor da SBEM em São Paulo, gostaria de estender os cumprimentos a todos os sócios da SBEM que estarão acompanhando esse seminário. Tá? E por que discutir, né? Pesquisa e formação de professores para melhoria da qualidade de prática matemática, o professor com esse conhecimento especializado. Parece que é algo tão recente, né? Parece que é algo atual, e a gente vê o grande desafio que a sociedade precisa mesmo estar envolvido, né? Está envolvida, embora ela esteja fazendo isso há um bom tempo, mas nesse cenário de desmonte das políticas públicas, de ataque, de desqualificação à ciência, de ataque aos profissionais da educação, torna-se ainda mais oportuno colocar em evidência eventos, seminários dessa natureza. E que bom que a gente consegue ter uma abrangência também internacional para a gente ver, né, e visibilizar as atrocidades e os problemas que nós estamos passando no contexto brasileiro. A gente vive a nossa sociedade, uma sociedade pujante, uma sociedade que hoje nós estamos trabalhando para completar todos os estados com diretorias regionais. Atualmente, nós temos somente 4 estados, na região do Norte, Rondônia e Amazonas, e na região Nordeste, Maranhão e Piauí, sem regional da SBEM. Esperamos, máximo de março do ano que vem, completar todas as regionais do nosso país, para que sejamos ainda mais uma sociedade inclusiva, resistente a todos os problemas que estamos passando, e fica sempre a mensagem a todos os professores, que nós, professores brasileiros, gostamos do que fazemos, somos felizes, muito felizes e responsáveis com a nossa função, com a nossa atuação, e gostaríamos muito, né, de exigir respeito do Ministério da Educação e convidar o Ministério da Educação para trabalhar não no desmonte das nossas políticas públicas, mas trabalhar em coordenação nacional para que possamos, de fato, que a educação de novo, a gente tem sempre que dizer, né, é uma política de Estado, não é uma política de governo. Então, fica sempre essa reflexão, que vocês tenham um ótimo evento, um ótimo seminário, ótimas discussões, que fiquem bem, e deixo também a minha solidariedade às famílias das vítimas e amigos da vítima, de todos os problemas que estamos passando agora, tá? Fique bem e muita saúde.
Muito bom. Obrigada, professor Marcelo, pelas suas colocações também. E passamos agora a palavra ao professor Dr. Ricardo Miranda Martins, que é diretor associado aí do IMEC.
Bom, bom dia a todos. Queria parabenizar pelo evento aí, mais um evento. Tenho certeza que vai ser um evento de muito sucesso, organizado pelo Miguel e pelo grupo dele. Queria agradecer, em nome da diretoria do IMEC, por a gente ter recebido o convite para participar da abertura. A gente já participou de outro evento que o Miguel organizou no ano passado e foi muito proveitoso. Acho que a gente precisa cada vez mais atravessar a rua aí, né, para ir para a faculdade de educação, conhecer os vizinhos melhor aí, né. Então, bom, queria justificar a ausência do Paulo, né? O Paulo está participando, foi convocado para as reuniões do planejamento estratégico da Unicamp, então ele não pôde estar aqui na abertura. Assim, eventos como esse são muito, eu acho que muita gente acha que eles são muito importantes para alunos da licenciatura, tanto para os alunos da licenciatura em matemática, né, que fazem o curso na UniMec, quanto para alunos da pedagogia, né? Então, assim, porque o ensino de matemática ele tem que começar de um jeito bom na cabeça, na cabecinha do aluno desde pequeno, né? E tem que continuar para sempre. Assim. Uma coisa é que os alunos acabam, quando eles veem eventos sobre licenciatura, sobre ensino de matemática, eles acabam percebendo assim que, poxa, será que eu não devia estar participando disso, né? Será que eu vou receber meu diploma? E será que eu vou estar apto a dar boas aulas, né? Eu acho que eles percebem que esse diploma, né, ele é necessário, né, pela legislação, mas nem de longe ele é suficiente, né? Você precisa continuar a estudar, a continuar a se formar. E assim, é muito bom que os alunos tenham a noção de que essa área é uma área onde é feita pesquisa, né? Em geral, quando se fala, quando a palavra pesquisa e matemática está na mesma frase, você costuma pensar em pesquisa em matemática pura, pesquisa em matemática aplicada, mas não, né? A pesquisa em ensino de matemática, como ensinar, como passar o conhecimento de forma melhor para os alunos, é uma coisa muito boa. A Faculdade de Educação tem feito isso há algum tempo. Recentemente, o Miguel tem certamente sido um dos responsáveis por movimentar essa área, mas, sei lá, poderia citar várias iniciativas do pessoal da educação. É impossível não citar aqui o professor Lorenzato, né, o professor Sérgio Lorenzato, que fez e faz muita coisa sobre isso. O professor Lorenzato é dessas pessoas incríveis, né, que faz muita coisa de matemática. Conheci ele pessoalmente no ano passado, num dos eventos do Miguel, e desde então ele já foi tomar vários cafés lá no IMEC com a gente, quando a gente podia, né, reunir para tomar café. Mas, assim, eu acho que participar de eventos desses, nossos alunos, eles percebem que você tem um conhecimento técnico, você sabe o que é uma função, você sabe como dividir números, mas você não pode passar isso para o aluno do jeito que você aprendeu no seu curso de graduação. Você precisa de um conhecimento especializado para ensinar isso para o aluno. Eu acho que esse evento é muito bom para isso. A gente, sempre que a gente vem em eventos de educação matemática, ensino de matemática, eventos grandes, a gente não, acaba lembrando da situação em comum que o Brasil vive, né, que a matemática do Brasil vive. Quanto assim a gente faz pesquisa de qualidade, nossa pesquisa em matemática aplicada é reconhecida internacionalmente, nós, por exemplo, em Olimpíadas de Matemática, estamos começando a ser um país que é uma potência, né? A gente acabou de ter o nosso melhor posicionamento na Olimpíada Internacional de Matemática, foi um 10º lugar, ficando à frente de países como Japão, França, Alemanha, países tradicionais, né? Quando você olha para o ensino básico, né, a gente está engateando, né? Sempre que sai algum resultado assim, a gente pode não acreditar em um ranking ou outro, mas quando todos dizem a mesma coisa, né, talvez tenha uma mensagem aí, né? É sempre assim, PISA ou qualquer outro tipo de avaliação de alunos, é sempre assim, Brasil ainda pior, Brasil caiu mais uma posição. Assim, o número de países é finito, né? Se a gente vai caindo de um em um, a gente vai chegar no último lugar e vai ficar lá. Então, assim, inacreditável que a gente não esteja lá ainda, a gente sempre consegue cair mais. E o jeito para resolver isso é formar melhor o professor, né? Claro, tem muitas políticas públicas que podem ser feitas, a participação da família na educação é muito interessante, mas o que está ao nosso alcance, né, que a gente pode fazer, é dar uma formação melhor para o professor, ensinar para ele como ensinar, muito mais do que dar o conhecimento técnico. E aí, bom, nesse seminário a gente vai ter vários exemplos de como fazer isso. Acho que vai ser uma coisa muito legal. A gente está online por um motivo ruim, né? A gente está online porque a gente não pode estar presencialmente, mas eu acompanho as atividades do CIEspMat há um tempo, eu sei que muitas coisas já eram transmitidas pelo Facebook e tal, o pessoal tinha essa preocupação, mas ter essas atividades online é muito bom, né? O Brasil é um país muito grande, mesmo que a gente dê todo o apoio possível, os professores não conseguem se deslocar até Campinas para participar de eventos desses, mas colocando online, colocando no YouTube, você consegue chegar em todo mundo, né? Então a pessoa consegue assistir uma palestra, assistir uma tarde de programação, e aí depois, aos pouquinhos, ela vai no YouTube recuperando tudo. Esse trabalho é muito importante, eu acho que finalmente a gente tem mais ou menos know-how para colocar tudo online, né? eu acho que isso vai continuar. Bom, e a ideia é melhorar a qualidade da educação, do ensino, né? Então, estando online já é um primeiro passo para isso. Bom, eu não vou me alongar mais, queria agradecer de novo pelo convite, parabenizar a organização e desejar muito sorte no evento aí.
Obrigada, professor Ricardo Miranda Martins, pelas suas palavras. E agora nós passamos a palavra, então, ao professor Dr. René Trentin Silveira, diretor da Faculdade de Educação da Unicamp.
Bom dia. Gostaria de cumprimentar todos os colegas aqui da mesa que me antecederam, também a Alessandra, que está fazendo a mediação aqui para a gente, as pessoas que estão nos bastidores, na parte técnica, garantindo aí a transmissão. Cumprimento também os participantes, os que nos acompanham pelo YouTube, estudantes, professores, de modo especial nossos colegas de outros países, sejam todos muito bem-vindos. Eu também queria agradecer aos organizadores do evento, em particular ao professor Carlos Miguel, pelo convite para participar da abertura deste evento tão importante, né, que é da maior relevância acadêmica e eu diria também política, como salientou o professor Marcelo, sobretudo nos dias atuais, em que, diante desse obscurantismo de Estado, chamaria assim, e dos constantes ataques à ciência, à educação, às artes, eu diria até ao bom senso, o papel do professor se torna ainda mais crucial, né? E, de modo particular, o papel do professor de matemática, que tem na sua missão de ensinar essa ciência um grande desafio por vários motivos. Primeiro, pela importância mesma da matemática para a formação intelectual das crianças, dos jovens, para o desenvolvimento da capacidade de raciocinar de forma rigorosa, coerente, abstrata, crítica. Acho que nunca precisamos tanto de pensamento rigoroso. Não por acaso a matemática, ao lado da língua portuguesa, é a área do conhecimento em que se exige proficiência nas avaliações de larga escala que servem para medir os avanços educacionais. Então, uma outra razão da importância dos desafios que se colocam para o professor de matemática é que eles, além de enfrentarem as dificuldades comuns a todos os outros professores, relacionadas, por exemplo, às condições de trabalho e outras tantas que nós conhecemos bem, precisam encarar ainda uma tarefa adicional, que é combater o preconceito muito difundido de que essa é uma disciplina muito difícil, desinteressante, acessível apenas a poucos privilegiados, né, os mais bem dotados intelectualmente, os gênios. Combater esse preconceito e afirmar, parafraseando Antonio Gramsci, o filósofo italiano do século XX, que, num certo sentido, todos somos matemáticos, porque todos somos capazes de aprender a pensar matematicamente. Então, afirmar isso, combatendo esse preconceito que eu mencionei, exige dos educadores repensar práticas, concepções, metodologias, intercambiar experiências, dialogar com seus pares, ouvir os estudantes, buscar aprimoramento constante, entre outras medidas que expressam o compromisso do professor com o ensino e o aprendizado da matemática. Eu não tenho dúvida de que este quarto seminário internacional CIEspMat será uma excelente ocasião para que isso tudo aconteça, e a FE, Faculdade de Educação da Unicamp, que orgulhosamente abriga o acervo de Malbataan, pseudônimo do escritor Júlio César de Melo Souza, sente-se honrada, privilegiada em hospedar e apoiar esse importante evento, ainda que seja uma hospedagem virtual, né, que é o que nos é possível nesse momento. Então, parabéns aos organizadores, aos participantes. Sejam todos muito bem-vindos, em especial nossos colegas de outros países. Sintam-se em casa, mesmo numa casa virtual. Desejo a todos um encontro muito proveitoso. Espero que essa seja também uma oportunidade para nós estreitarmos os vínculos, os laços de cooperação, como disse o professor Ricardo, que a gente atravesse mais essa rua, né, num caminho de mão dupla, ligando aí a faculdade ao IMEC de maneira mais intensa, e a direção fica à disposição de vocês para ajudar no que for preciso. Então, um bom dia, um ótimo evento, muito proveitoso a todos e muito obrigado.
Muito obrigada, professor René, pelas suas colocações, né? Então, com as palavras do professor René Trentin Silveira, diretor da Faculdade de Educação aqui da Unicamp, a gente encerra esse momento de solenidade, de abertura do evento, e eu passo a palavra já para o professor Miguel Ribeiro, que vai ser mediador da conferência e vai apresentar a nossa convidada de hoje, que já está aqui, né? Então, bom trabalho a todos, e Miguel, com você agora.
Bom, obrigado a todos, mais uma vez, pela participação. Eu agora vou mudar a linguagem para inglês, porque o meu alemão não é assim tão bom. Vou falar com a professora Susanne Prediger. E, portanto, os demais, se não quiserem, se tiverem algo para fazer, podem, outras coisas para fazer, podem sair, ou acompanhar pelo YouTube. Hello, Susanne, how are you?
Hi, good to meet you.
Yeah, nice to see you. Well, I'm going to make a short presentation of you in Portuguese.
Okay? Well, that's what I was afraid of. I don't know if you say nice things or bad things about me.
Well, it will be difficult to say bad things, but just 2 or 3 things new, and then you can start the presentation, because the important thing is to listen to you. Okay?
Ok.
Bom, a professora Susanne Prediger é alemã, é professora em Dortmund e é uma das pesquisadoras mais importantes, pesquisadoras no âmbito da formação de professores e no âmbito propositivo de propostas para influenciar as políticas públicas da formação de professores na Alemanha. Portanto, tem vários projetos de pesquisa que têm relação direta com algumas das mudanças que têm sido implementadas em diferentes regiões da Alemanha para a formação de professores. É editora de várias revistas, algumas das mais importantes revistas no âmbito da internacional das matemáticas. E, por último, não é menos importante, é a atual presidente da Sociedade Europeia de Pesquisa em Educação Matemática, que é a organizadora do CERM, portanto, o Congresso Europeu de Pesquisa em Educação Matemática, e eu convido todos a irem à página do CERM e a que possam participar. Pois é um contexto importantíssimo, é um contexto em que nos permite tomar contato com outras pesquisas, e foi precisamente quando eu conheci a Susanne, quando era ainda jovem e quando era ainda jovem pesquisador. E portanto agora eu vou passar a palavra à Susanne, porque o importante é ouvirmos o que ela tem para dizer, que é sempre muito instigante e que o objetivo é que nos faça pensar. Se tiverem questões, podem colocar no chat, nós vamos tomando nota e ficamos a explicar as questões no final. Okay, Susanne?
Okay.
I just made some huge presentation of you.
I hope nothing embarrassing between
you. Compliment. So do you want to do the presentation in a row and then questions at the end, or?
How much time do we have as a whole?
In total, a maximum of 2 hours.
Wow. Okay, then please interrupt me. That's fine.
Okay.
It's much better than doing it in the end. And don't be polite and try to raise your hand just to talk, because it's I have already taken also my iPad here to see your faces, but it's easier if you just start talking and asking questions.
Well, because it's on YouTube, I will ask people to write the questions, and then I can translate it and post it to you.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, I'll be happy with that.
Okay.
That's fine.
The floor is yours.
Okay, so obrigada for this invitation. It's more or less the only Portuguese word I can say. I'm happy to be with you. It's one of the only advantages of these crazy times that we all got used to online working, and so it's possible for me to jump to Brazil for 2 hours and then go back home. That's great. I heard that you have a meeting for talking about what research could be about and getting some ideas about things that could be done or which might be important. And I thought I could present you a bit the work that we do with our group in Dortmund. We call it the MUM research group, Mathematics Learning Under Conditions of Multilingual Situations, Language Diversity. And yeah, I just brought you some things to think about and discuss. What we are trying to do in Dortmund is to understand and to foster the mathematics learning of those kids that we call language learners. And these are not only newly immigrated people, but many students who do not have enough language learning opportunities. At the same time, it will be a talk advertising one major research format that we call design research, and show a bit what we can do with design research and what we have to do in other research approaches. So let me start with briefly advertising why language is an important topic in mathematics education. Then I want to present you some design principles, talk about the specific gap that we found that we had to fill with our research, and then continue showing the research per se. So why language? Why is language so important for mathematics learning? What we seem to share between Brazil and Germany are strong equity concerns. Some students do very well in school, learn well. Others, and especially those of marginalized groups of students, do not at all well. This achievement gap is not at all a failure of the students, but it is a failure of the education system. Especially in a country like Germany, which is one of the richest countries, which doesn't have much resources outside education. We believed to have a good education system until 20 years ago, when we realized it is a marvelous education system, but only for some students, and we lose too many others. So what can we do not to lose so many students? This is the core of what we are doing here. When we want to strengthen equity for our specific topic in view, mathematics education, we need to understand what exactly is the problem. So what are these disadvantaging factors of marginalized groups which hinder them from getting access to mathematics learning? We need to understand the mechanisms why these disadvantaging factors really hinder the mathematics learning. And then on this base, develop instructional approaches to improve the mathematics teaching. So the first thing we did approximately 10 years ago was really doing some large-scale assessment, reanalyzing data from achievement data, bringing it together with different factors that might be crucial. So here's the sum of possible factors that is discussed in Germany, which might be responsible for this gap of achievement. Is it the immigrant status? Is it the fact that some students learn German later because in their family they learn first another language? Is it the reading proficiency? Is it socioeconomic status? Or is it language proficiency in academic language? And for each of these factors, we calculated the proportion of variation that it has on the mathematics achievement, and there was a very clear result for the German students, for 1,500 students. It is the language proficiency in the language of teaching and learning that has the most influence on the mathematics achievement. Much more than multilingualism or immigrant status or SAS or anything. And in my view, this is a fantastic news, because many of these factors who are standing here cannot be influenced by school. They are just something that is given in the families. But the only factor that can really influence by school, the language proficiency in the academic language, this is the most crucial. And this comprises multilingual students as well as monolingual students who also sometimes have limited access to a higher elaborate language. So this is very abstract. I want to introduce you to the very concrete players in our research. I want to introduce you to two typical kids, grade 6 students, Javid and Ismet. Both are born in Germany. Both are fluent in everyday German. But one of them speaks another language at home, Turkish. The other one is monolingual German, but still has only limited opportunities of learning a higher elaborate language level at home, because his parents simply don't need that for her life. So we call him also an academic language learner. These kids are highly motivated, but school hasn't really worked for them so far. They are in grade 6, and they haven't really learned what they should have learned there. The school system has failed to a certain degree. For example, when these kids work with fractions, they would simply turn around quite arbitrarily the order. This is of course false, but typically something. They could do the fraction calculation in the moment they learned it, but 2 weeks later they have forgotten it because it is not connected to a conceptual understanding behind the procedures. And this is already a quite typical thing, what we can empirically show. The language gap, so the achievement gap, which can be explained by different language proficiency, is less relevant for procedural knowledge and highly relevant for conceptual understanding. I will come back to that. Why is this the case? So what is the problem for those kids who speak German but whose language is not sufficiently developed for learning deeper mathematics? And that's absolutely something that you need to do in Germany for advancing. You can have some achievement in school without conceptual knowledge, but not really. These students are not used to participate in rich discourse practices. They are not used to explaining meanings, to argumenting, to reporting longer things. But these are the discourse practices needed to develop conceptual understanding. These kids have some language resources, but they are not sufficiently used in school for their language learning. So let's change the picture. We cannot only look at the students. We need to look at the students and the teachers and the instruction going on there. This teacher, again, he's highly motivated, but he does not really know how to help them in this moment. I will show you the moment later. And as he has learned something about language responsive teaching, he has started doing something. But training vocabulary, such as the denominator, the numerator, does not help the kids in any better access to mathematics. So what I want to advertise today is we need to go much deeper into the situation. If we really want to increase equity in mathematics education by working with language, we need to better understand the role of the language in mathematics learning and teaching. And we need to specify the language demands. So what is it exactly that these kids cannot do yet that they should have learning opportunities for? And then we can specify exactly how the instruction can be designed to help them learning the language and the mathematics. And I want to advertise that for doing these things, design research, topic-specific design research, is a very good research approach for achieving that. What I'm telling here is not completely new. Of course, it's not only in Germany, but all over the world that researchers have shown these achievement gaps. In the beginning, mainly for multilingual students, and later also for others. And many researchers all over the world have shown it's not a failure of the student, but of the school system. The way phrasing it is, for example, saying that the achievement gap is an opportunity gap, because those students who are not so acquainted with the language so far, they miss the rich learning opportunities they would need to learn deeper mathematics. And these researchers have rejected a purely deficit-oriented perspective on the students and always emphasized it's the deficit of the school system. What we have done in our work here in Dortmund, in Germany, is what I've already told you. We have shown that the language gaps do not only occur for multilingual students. It's not about having another language or not. They occur also for monolingual students if they do not have access to a more elaborate, we call it academic language. And we have provided empirical evidence that the language gap is mainly located in conceptual understanding, not so much in procedural skills. You can learn some procedural skills without language, but you cannot get the deeper insights in what all of that means if you don't have an elaborate language. People might say this is boring, it's all well known. It was not boring for us because we needed these kinds of hard quantitative data from large-scale assessment just to raise fundings for going deeper in understanding why this is the case and what we can do against it. It's also not new that researchers have called for doing something. One very big approach is including students' multilingual resources and conceptualize not the gaps in language proficiency, but differences. Students bring in something highly valuable, but it's not compatible with what school needs. And these difference perspectives, rather than deficit perspectives, are of high value in the sense of having another view on the students. The everyday resources that students bring in are highly functional in out-of-school contexts. So we can talk about students' languages in a plural way, and they are fine. But we need to find bridges between the students' language resources and the target language, which is the academic language. Bridging that is important. And we know that there is a lot of qualitative research showing that all over the world, which was helpful for our work too. What has been requested since a long time, but not really realized so far, is really going into developing and investigating instructional approaches that can help the language learners to develop their language in mathematics education. So this is what we were going to. We call it a fostering-oriented perspective. Let's not stop with saying we should accept what students bring in. Let's really find out how we can enhance their language for the mathematics learning. And that's why we needed to understand in detail why the resources that students bring in are not sufficient for acquiring mathematical conceptual understanding. That was not so clear for me in the beginning, and we had to work on that, because this allowed us to go beyond some very general principles of what language responsive teaching could look like, and really work on different mathematical topics, work on how it is for fractions, how it is for percentages, how it is for functions, and working through it for these different topics. This is the main goal of our work in Dortmund. Nicely based upon international work. So what is it that we could start with? There are some general design principles there that we took up, but we needed to go deeper into the topic-specific things afterwards. So the most important design principle, you might be aware of that, you might know that, for developing conceptual understanding in mathematics, it's 50 years old. It's the idea that whenever we want students to acquire conceptual understanding of a mathematical topic, we need to relate the different representations, the language representations with the symbolic representations, with graphical representations. This is not new, that's 50 years old. But the interesting thing is, what is this language in here? Because this language, these are many different kinds of social languages. Pim has already said that also 30 years ago, that there is the informal language that students bring in that should be leveraged to the mathematical language. And there might be something in between. Pim called it the more structured language. Today we would call that the academic language. And mathematics classrooms can deepen students' conceptual understanding if they succeed in connecting these different language levels, these different language registers. The situation might be even a bit more complicated for multilingual students. So there they have the everyday language, the school academic language, and the technical language in their first language and their second language. For example, for our Javid, he is fluent in Turkish and German everyday language, but he has never learned the academic language, the technical language in Turkish. And we need these flexible connections between all. So combining both, this is one major idea of all language responsive designs. Let's provide learning opportunities that students can bring in what they already know in the concrete representations, the graphical representations, the everyday language, and use that for working through and developing the school academic language and the symbolic representations. You might be acquainted to this general idea because it's very powerful, and here only a bit elaborated in disentangling that language is not one bottle, but 6 different varieties. So this is one major design principle, relating languages, registers, representations. And 2 other design principles have been proven to be very powerful for designing classroom instruction in which language can be learned. Engaging students in rich discourse practices, in which they are again and again invited and supported to articulate the meanings and connections of representations in registers, to argue, to explain meanings by using mathematical concepts also for mathematizing everyday problems. The third design principle of macro scaffolding I will explain later because this is perhaps new. The point is, when we say we want to do that, then the school academic language register is very important. We know in principle what we mean by academic language. Academic language is the language variety in which language is a bit more elaborate, the vocabulary is a bit larger, the grammar is more complex, and it contains everything that is needed for school academic purposes. Higher precision, de-accentuation perhaps, specialized vocabulary. In these principal ideas are well elaborated by the linguists, but what exactly is it that a student like Javid and CIEspMat have to learn from this school academic language register so that they can successfully learn mathematics? That was not so clear. In the beginning, I thought that's very easy. I can simply take what I can learn from linguistics and from language education and apply it in mathematics education. But then we realized that it's not that simple. We can learn something about their pedagogies to do that, but we need to specify much more clearly what exactly are these academic language demands which occur in our nice picture, for which students need learning opportunities. And what exactly for the kind of mathematical knowledge that has turned out to be the most crucial for developing conceptual understanding. So we started with what we call topic-specific design research. What does that mean? Design research is a research format that combines a design of teaching learning arrangements based on research insights with research-based, design-based research. So a research based on good designs. We start with specifying and structuring the learning content. So in our case here, we knew we wanted to work on conceptual understanding of fractions. And of course, there's a lot of literature what this entails. So what are the conceptual elements that students have to understand when they learn fractions? We knew that from literature, but we were not clear. This is the specification gap I talked about. What are these academic language stuff that they have to know for acquiring the conceptual understanding of fractions? And we realized we cannot only test that by just giving them some test items, because we first had to organize a learning opportunity so that we can see what we want to see. So we developed a teaching learning arrangement that used the design principles I have presented, And then we conducted design experiments. In the beginning with 2 kids, for example, that's where Javid and Isma come from, and analyzed these design elements. And for learning about the other things. So, in the beginning I said the teacher has no idea what to do. That's not true. He is well prepared for the situation. He came with these kinds of fraction bars and started to work with the kids. And he knew that connecting multiple representations is good, but he also knew that it's not enough to just say this is 3/5 or this is 3/4, 3/4, but they need to talk about how the picture is related to the symbolic expression. So this is what he wanted to achieve. The kids were able to say to which fraction these bars relate, but they were not really able to talk about it. Let me bring you into the situation and see what I mean. The teacher asks, what in this graphical representation represents the fraction? And Javid answers, first you need to count the fields. This is 5, and then the 3 colored fields, 3/5. Exactly. And what of these 2 represents the 3/5 actually? First you have to count the fields. Here it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 3 colored. Is this a successful communication about conceptual understanding? Well, we would say not really. The teacher tries to engage the 2 boys in explaining the meaning of fractions in the fraction bar. Javid gives a limited answer. From his answer, it's not really clear if he had understood the structure or not. The teacher asked for more explicit explanation, but his question is not really elaborate. He doesn't have a better idea how to ask than only asking the same thing again. Javid is a student. He knows that when a teacher asks back, he needs to say something more. But the only thing that he can explicate more is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. From this situation, we are not really sure if the boys have understood what exactly the fraction entails or not. So the teacher continues and asks them to do something with the fraction. How do you see in the picture which fraction is bigger? And Ismet and Javid say, well, here are 5 and here are only 4. So the 3/5 is bigger than the 3/4. Now we see exactly that the boys have not understood what they are doing there. They are able to relate the 2 representations, but only if we start talking about what to do with the representations, we can see that the relevant part-whole structure that is represented by the bar is not clear for them. Seeing more pieces here than here is not what we want to make the main structure. We want them to see the part-whole structure and compare the part-whole structure. And we get an idea why language is so important to communicate about graphical representations. In this case, the language of the teacher and the language of the students is too restricted so that the discourse cannot really succeed in making the meaning explicit of the part-whole structure. They could do that. They could even use the technical words, numerator and denominator. They had learned that in their former classrooms. But, and they could also relate it to the graphical representation. But we see nicely in this episode why we need language. It's not self-explaining how we should read these graphical representations. What are the most relevant structures in the graphical representation that make the fraction? Javid's resources are nice in a certain way, but they are not sufficient here for unpacking the meaning of the fraction. When we look at it, we see that he talks about the 5, he talks about the 3, but the way he relates the 5 and the 3 is quite limited. And then is what students love to say, but and then does not really help to unpack the meaning of the part-whole structure. What he does here is he is able to sequence what he has to do into a procedure and explicate the counting, but not explicate the part-whole relation. And this is very typical. We found that in many situations. Students are able to articulate what to do, but whenever it comes to mathematical relations, mathematical structures, their language is at an end. So what more would we need to unfold the meaning of the graphical representation or the meaning of the symbolic representation? We would need some meaning-related language that really helps us to articulate the part-whole relation. We want the students to be able to talk about the part of the whole, to talk about not 3 and 5, but about 3 out of 5. So in any way, we need them to talk about the relation between the 3 and the 5. And it's not sufficient to give them the word out of, but the word out of must be connected to the meaning of this part-whole relation. And that's exactly what the teacher is doing in the next moment. He's starting to articulate between the two, the part, the whole, the part, the whole, and how they are connected. This is the important thing. So here we see what I meant with the everyday register, the academic language register, and the technical language register. What the students can bring into the situation is about reporting how to do a procedure, but the only connector that he uses in this moment and in many other moments is and then. And then is not sufficient for articulating the part-whole relation. And when we jump too quickly from the everyday language resources the students bring in to the formal, the technical language that helps us to talk about the symbolic representation, then we miss the most important part for conceptual understanding. Conceptual understanding always means meaning making. And meaning making requires a meaning related language that for most teachers is not really part of the mathematical language. I would say it should be. So this here, the meaning related language, that is the major part. And this is the typical academic language demands, which has turned out to be very important in most of our projects when we want to find out what is it that students need to develop conceptual understanding. It's not academic language as a whole, but these parts are things that the language proficient students are able to articulate without any support, because it's also part of their language in the families. But in the marginalized families, you would usually not talk about parts and wholes at home, and you need to learn that in school. So in order to make this happen, to develop these kinds of meanings for students, we can also, of course, go to context situations, but also the context situations need the explicit articulation of the mathematical relations, and this is what we learned is the most important thing. By these kinds of analysis of the design experiments, we learned what engaging students in rich discourse practices must mean in mathematics classrooms. The general principle is clear, but we need to talk about what is rich in rich discourse practice. And we learned that reporting about procedures is the discourse practice that most students learn in mathematics classroom, which is fine and nice, but it only helps for the procedures. If you want to learn about the meanings, you need other discourse practices, describing mathematical structures and explaining meanings. So we could specify that. And also for the design principle of relating representations and languages, we learned that for 50 years we might have believed that graphical representations are the solution. Now we would say graphical representations are important, but they are not sufficient because they are not self-explaining. We need the language that helps to explicate the meanings and the structures that a mathematician sees into that graphical representation. In our specific case, the part-whole relationship. So this is what we learned. And this helped us for the next working area in our design research cycle. The fourth working area is about generating local theory elements on the design and on the learning content. In our case, we learned that for specifying what language is relevant, we need a functional perspective on the language that connects the lexical and syntactical and discursive dimensions to the mathematics learning in view. And in our specific case, we learned that the meaning-related vocabulary is the crucial means for explaining meanings. So we could enrich our learning content, but went back to the first working area of specifying the learning content, and now knew what students have to learn are the discourse practices of explaining meanings and describing structures, and is the meaning-related vocabulary, part out of whole, 3 out of 5, that you need to develop the conceptual understanding. This helped us to redesign our learning arrangement and then go back in the next design experiments for seeing, yes, it helps now, for further developing the theory and going through it usually 2 or 3 times before we are really satisfied with what we do. Here I said it's about generating theory. Design research does not only aim to develop nice learning arrangements, design research also aims at developing theory. And the theory we developed started from Hibert's definition of what conceptual understanding is. Hibert has defined conceptual understanding is having a network of meanings for concepts, for the models with the concepts, and relations between the meaning. In his words, conceptual knowledge is characterized as a knowledge that is rich in relationships. It can be thought of as a connected web of knowledge, a network in which the linking relationships are as prominent as the discrete pieces of information. We draw upon a Swiss psychologist, Abele, who has refined this idea, saying, well, if I look at the knowledge of an expert, then there is not a big network. It has just been condensed in very compact concepts. But the experts are those who are able to unfold what they have if needed. The compaction usually includes complex networks and relationships, but conceptual unfolding is exactly the moment in the learning process where the language is so important, because you need to decompose also the language into more explicit elements of understanding and relation. I will give you another example. I will give you the example that has been explored with my PhD student Karina Zindel. When we say functional relationship, the expert knows that functional relationship entails many different conceptual elements. The expert will immediately think about one quantity and the second quantity, about the idea that the one quantity is varying, and then I look what the second quantity is doing, and that we can capture these quantities by an independent variable and the dependent variable, and that the direction of dependency might be important. All these ideas can be unfolded in a certain way and can be compacted, if possible, in one nice concept. On the language side, this would perhaps mean, for example, when we talk about the mileage and dependency of speed, then everything is clear for an expert. But for a student who have to learn this concept of functional relationship, it must be decomposed. And the decomposition does not only take place in the everyday language. Usually you already need some more elaborate academic language for this kind of decomposition. There is the mileage, the speed. When the speed increases, then the mileage also gets higher. The function in view here tells you for which speed you have which mileage. This, again, is not yet the everyday language of the student, but it is this intermediate language level that is needed to be developed before students can connect to that. So this is quite typical. When we go for a design process, we have the process, which is going round several times, and we do that for achieving certain outcomes in our design research. On the one hand, there are design outcomes. We want to have a better specified and structured learning content. We want to have a teaching learning arrangement. Usually we do things that we can then really give to teachers directly by open educational resources. But we also have research outcomes, and these research outcomes are the abstracted contributions to theories that help us to talk about typical learning processes with the typical learning pathways that students go through and obstacles that can occur on this pathway, and the typical local theory contributions on the teaching processes, talking about what design elements are needed and under which conditions can they be effective. By working through the cycle several times, we can achieve that. So that's what design research is about. Here are the big what questions. Here are the how questions. How can I achieve that students learn something? Then we look at the learning processes. We look at them in detail for generating some local theories. And the local theories, they entail categories, what to consider. They explain a bit the mechanisms behind it. And from the local theories, we can generate some hypotheses how to design the learning opportunities in order to deepen the learning. What I have shown here for fractions has been transferred to the next project. We started with fractions, we continued with percentages, we also worked on probabilities, calculus, functions, and more, always with the question, we seem to know from the mathematics literature what students should learn from the mathematical side for acquiring conceptual understanding. But we need to specify by empirical research what they have to do, what they have to learn on the language side. And each time it is this meaning-related discourse practice and the meaning-related vocabulary that turns out to be very crucial. And then we integrate that into the learning arrangement, provide learning opportunities for learning, and see, yes, okay, now more students achieve a better conceptual understanding. Age is different, mathematical topic is different, but it's always the same idea. And that is the idea that is connected with this principle of macro scaffolding. Macro scaffolding is the name that is used in language education, and we started to use it too. So on the language side, we know from language education, and we already know from David Pym, that the learning trajectory should start with students' individual everyday language resources, and they should be connected to the school academic language register. Now we know that the meaning-related language is the most important thing here, and then this should be connected to the technical register. We could now specify that more clearly. These are the discourse practices which are important there, and this is the vocabulary that is important for it. On the first level, it's about expressing first ideas, about describing context situations, and we try to work with what the students bring in as their individual resources for meaning making. On the second level, we support the students in really participating in explaining meanings. Explaining meanings is not only done by the teacher, but should also be done by the students. For this, they need graphical representations, they need the meaning-related vocabulary, they need more connectives than and then. They need connectives for relations and structures, for the independency of, for the function, out of, for the part-whole relationships. But it's not only of giving them words, but giving them the meanings of the words. And then in the third step, we can connect that to the formal technical vocabulary. And in this phase, also these sequencing connectives and then might be important. Here's an example for percentages. We tried to bring this language learning trajectory together with the conceptual learning trajectory. And we could work with something that has nicely been done in realistic mathematics education, which goes exactly through these 4 steps. And we could try to synchronize the conceptual learning trajectory with the language learning trajectory. On the level 1, we want the students to construct some meanings, and now for percentages, that's the teaching unit I use for this example. We watch out where are the everyday context resources that students have, and we know, of course, every 12-year-old student knows download bars, and the download bar is exactly what we need for establishing a good graphical representation for percentages. The percent bar is very important and powerful, and if we start the learning trajectory with the download bar, we can also activate a lot of students' everyday resources. They discuss their ideas immediately. They very naturally talk about what is already loaded, what must still be loaded. They naturally see that here it must be about 35%, 25%. We can mobilize everything they have there. And we try to take that and bring it to a bit less acquainted situation. But we continue using the percent bar for developing students' informal strategies and for establishing a joint language, meaning-related language for talking about the meanings. And whatever we establish there, we connect it to the percent bar. That is very important on level 2. And only on level 3, the technical vocabulary comes in. And only on level 3, the procedural skills of using any formula for determining amounts and weights and bases come in. And we connect these technical things to what they have learned before when we started to develop their intuitions and their meaning making. And of course, on this level, they are also able to work on abstract tasks without graphical representations. So this is a way through. I was missing level 4. And when they are able to do that on level 4, then they are also able to work with more complex context situations on work like that. This kind of dual learning trajectory in which the conceptual mathematical learning is connected to the language learning needed on each level, this has turned out to be very powerful in our projects. So here is an example. When we work through, this is the intended learning trajectory. And Birte Pöhler, my PhD student, has worked through all her data material from the design experiments. You can imagine 30 hours of video data, trying to find what are the students doing, how do they pick up the different language learning opportunities we give them, and see how they use it. So in which way does the individual learning pathway of the student correspond or deviate from what we planned originally, the intended learning trajectory we gave them? And this is what Birte found when she compared how students expressed these different elements that are relevant for percentages, the base, the weight, the amount, the weight saved. How do students express that? Then she could trace that indeed they go from students' individual everyday resources. In the beginning, they talk about the long bar, they only talk about the 80 euros, they talk about this and that and here. And during the learning situation, they increasingly adopt the meaning-related vocabulary and connect it to the base and connect it back to other meaning-related vocabulary. The teaching trajectory, so the order in which we offer the things, is very simple. Of course, the individual pathways are not these simple. They are more complex, as you see here, starting here, working there, going back and forward. But in a certain way, they work through all three. So the intended learning trajectory could be shown in the qualitative analysis to respond nicely to the individual learning pathway, of course, with much more ups and downs. So this is what we do when we say we work with design research and these 4 working areas in several cycles. We clarify the what questions, we clarify the how questions. What should I teach? How should I teach? And then we carefully look at the learning processes. And it takes long. I mean, it takes a 3-year PhD project to really analyze what's going on there. We try to generate local theories and go back and do this several times. If we want to have quantitative evidence that this really works, we need to go beyond design research. So this is the next step, conducting randomized control trials or quasi-randomized control trials for really showing efficacy, for looking at an intervention group, a control group, making a pre-test, making a post-test. And indeed, we have done that, and we are really proud that we can say, yes, we can show our intervention group that learns with this language-responsive teaching unit learns significantly more than the control group. So now we can say the design principles that we have elaborated have now been also validated. If we make sure that students acquire the meaning-related language, then they also learn more conceptual understanding. We can show that. We have empirical evidence for that. So we can say, yes, it does work. There's another step of the research really showing that it works also in schools. We have not yet published about this, but we can also say, yes, we succeeded in doing that. I think I will stop here first for giving you the opportunities to ask questions, to discuss what I have presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanne, for your presentation. Until this moment, we have 2 questions. One from Samuel, and another one from Milena. And they will. Samuel is one of the organizers, and Milena, you know her, is one of my PhD students. Okay? But they will pose the questions themselves. Okay, Samuel.
Okay.
Samuel,
the micro is not on.
I'm sorry. Is it okay now?
I hear a lot of noise.
Oh, I'm sorry. It was my connection that made some noise. Now I took off. Is it okay now?
Just go ahead. We will try to.
Okay. Well, I was saying thank you very much for the very nice talk up to now. I've learned a lot. And my question was related to your very beginning diagnostics of the gap between the language and the mathematics. And I was thinking about, is there a causal relation between those 2 gaps, or is there any source common for both of the gaps?
Very important question. When we talk about achievement gaps, we talk about the achievement in mathematics and the identification that the achievement gap is caused by a language gap. That was an important step. So if students come into school with differences in their language proficiency, then this impacts the mathematics learning. And you are absolutely right. At this moment in time, we can only say, oh, it's a correlation. Well, yes, we see that. It correlates. But for understanding why language is so important for successfully learning mathematics, we needed to go through all the research here, just because we didn't understand it in the beginning. But when we started to observe the kids and see exactly what their problems are, then we realized that it is, sorry for doing that, but that it is this point. So here's the reason why it is the case. For developing language, you need to be able to express what the mathematical concepts mean. And in many publications, you see that people have a lot of trust in students' everyday language resources. Say, if we give the everyday language some room, then we can jump to the formal language. And this works for students who are language proficient already. But for students with a restricted language, it is exactly that meaning-related language in between that first has to be developed. So here's the reason for the gap. Students who are language proficient, they have this and that already. They come into school with the two. That's why people, many teachers cannot distinguish. But and teachers only feel responsible for making them learn the formal language. But students with less language resources, those who have limited access to language, they only come with that. And they lack the meaning-related language in between. And if the teacher jumps too quickly from the everyday language resources to the formal language, they are lost. That is the reason how we explain these statistical correlations. And that's why now we work on teaching units that provide language learning opportunities for this meaning-related language for all students.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Susanne. The Samuel sound is quite strange.
Yeah, but we got it. I'm happy we heard this question. It was important.
Thank you. Now we have a question from Milena. Okay, Milena.
Thank you. Thank you, Susanne, for your presentation, and it's always an event hearing you. Thank you. Actually, I have two questions. First of all, I would like to hear from you about the role of the teachers in this work, because it might be obvious, but it's not so obvious that when a teacher, for example, hear from the student that when he say 3 and then 5, and he or she doesn't be aware about this specific thing, that it's not a detail, and you know what we have to do and what you've been doing in this situation, in this work, or you are not paying attention now for this role of the teachers, only focusing on the students. And the second question is about, because you said, now, first of all, we focus on fractions, and now we are focusing on probability or percentage and etc. Why is so important changing the mathematical topic? It's not an obvious question here in Brazil, because here there are many studies, there are many researchers that don't pay attention about this detail, you know. Thank you.
Let me start with the second question. For me, this is really important. We don't only need the big ideas, we need to work through it topic by topic, because it's a bit different in every topic. And what we are doing in our design research work is really, together with teachers, developing teaching units for the different topics, and then looking into it. You come, if you don't pay attention for the specific mathematical topic, we always risk to stay a bit superficial with respect to the mathematics learning. So it's very important to go into that and work with it in very detail. So when you look at the publications, you see each time we work on one mathematical topic and try to grasp the epistemological depth of the topic and the relation to language in this case. The second question opens a complete new universe of research. Your question about the role of the teacher is very important. So, as I told you, we first worked with the students, then we did these efficacy tests, but when we go into the field, we need to work not only with the 2 teachers who have been working with us the last 20 years, but with many teachers. And then the same story starts. On the next level, we start to do design research for teachers. That means we need to find out, what do the teachers have to learn? How can they learn it? Try to develop a PD design, put it to the test, experiment, see what they do, refine our theory, etc., etc. And the slide I have opened here is our current answer of what the teachers had to learn. So you were talking about the teachers need to notice students' language. Absolutely. That's one of her first jobs. So the teacher has to learn to demand which language practices from the students, but then to have a diagnostic view and notice what kind of language does the student use and what does the student need to develop further. Then her next job is to support the language that is not yet developed, but not only support in the specific moment, but also in the longer term. So successively developing the language by these learning trajectories is the next stop what the teacher has to do. And when we were quite aware of these 4 jobs, but when we started working with teachers, we realized the most crucial problem is teachers do all of this, but not with the most relevant language parts. So they invested, for example, a lot of energy in making students say numerator and denominator, which is of course an adequate goal, but it does not help for developing conceptual understanding. And we had to add this 5th job. So teachers have to learn to identify those language demands which are really relevant for the mathematics learning. If they don't learn that, they waste their time. And for learning that, they need some categories in which they can think. And here you find, again, what I have presented on the classroom level. We realize that this is the most important things that teachers have to learn. They need to see this connection between the mathematical learning goals. If I want to teach procedural skills, then the discourse practice of reporting procedures is important, and then the technical vocabulary is important. But if I teach for conceptual understanding, then another discourse practice is important, and another set of vocabulary is important. And only if teachers have learned that, they can do their jobs in an adequate way. So what we have started then is really the design research cycles on the teacher level. And there is a paper on that, if you're interested, published last year in Merge, in the Australian journal, Mathematics Education Research Journal, talking about the teacher learning. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Susanne, for the answers, and Samuel and Elena for the questions. At the moment, we don't have any more questions, so if you want to finish the presentation.
Are you sure you don't have more questions?
Well, I have some, but I want to pose at the end.
No, but pose them, please.
Because one of my issues was related with what Milena asked. So the role of the teachers and the importance of paying attention to the specificities of the content and of the teacher's knowledge, awareness, noticing. So you have a lot of research on that, but how do you relate the research you do with the teacher's training? Meaning, what is if you can talk about a bit about that. What kind of implications? I know it's not directly with the topic, but it's related. What kind of implications do you perceive from doing that kind of research and the impact on the work of teachers?
So you might really be interested in that paper. I've just opened it to show you. For me, for developing good professional development, I again need the whole design research cycle. Where is it? It should be in here. Sorry, no, this is the landscape. So that's the same cycle as you have seen, only in other colors, in our teacher education colors. And we try to specify what teachers should learn. We develop a design for the professional development. We do the professional development. We take the video camera and observe what we see. We try to specify what is it that teachers bring in, what teachers could learn nicely, what do we need to develop further. We continue specifying the PD goals and go for the next design. So this is the way we are working here. Wait a minute, I can perhaps open that in this presentation for you. If you want to know how exactly the research is, no, how the PD takes place, was that your question? Do you want to know about the PD research or about the PD?
About the PD, because the relationship between the research you have shown us or some other and the PD process, because that's one of the issues here in the Brazilian context. So there's a lot of research, and as Milena mentioned, it's not really related with the math topics. So that's one of the core aspects from your talk is bringing together the language and the mathematics. But here there's a lot of research on education, math education, but then there is a lack of relationship with the teacher's professional development program in order to actually discuss the mathematics in related with what they have to teach. So if you have...
Okay, so I am the vice director of the German National Center for Mathematics Teacher Education, and we definitely work on the basic assumption that PD should always be around the mathematics. When we do that, for example, for this language responsiveness here, then we do a first session, 4 hours, in which we go through these jobs, work with these teachers on these jobs. Then we send them home to explore in their classrooms with a very specific writing task on conceptual understanding of mathematics. They come back with their experiences in the classroom. Then we work on the whole percentage unit. So we give them what I showed you, some of the tasks of the teaching unit on percentages. In the PD, we give the teachers 6 of these tasks and ask them, how would you sequence them? What would be the first task? What would be the last task, and why? And we come into this conversation about why it is important to think about the hypothetical learning trajectory for students. And they do that, and they identify the language demands. We watch videos from classrooms from this percentage unit, discuss on, did the teacher meet the main point, the main problem of the student, or has he missed the main point? And when they have been prepared like that, they go home, they explore with this teaching unit on percentages. They start to make their own experiences with the sequencing, and then they come back. And again, we watch videos and discuss the mathematical idea development of the student. So the learning trajectory, learning pathway of the student in this video. We also discuss about teacher moves, but not in an abstract way, always very much bound to the mathematics. And then they continue their exploration, and they have a specific look on the interaction. And then we come back and work also on something else. So I'm not sure if I answer your question, but in our PD, the mathematics is always the base. And we support the teachers of making new experiences by giving them some teaching material researched and designed carefully, and ask them to do their experience with the material. Then they come back and we discuss what has worked and what has not worked. Give them some theory about the epistemological backgrounds and continue the work on this. I can see if I have a very concrete... For example, this is a kind of PD activity that we give them. So we situate what other teachers have done, and we ask them to find some support and discuss the support list. And then we ask them to analyze what students have written and why it doesn't work. So it's concretely bound to the fractions here, and work with that. Does that answer your question, Miguel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, no, we don't have any more questions. So if you want to continue or summarizing.
Okay. Yeah, so in your context, it might really be interesting to think about, when we have a plan what should happen in classrooms, then we need to make a plan what should happen on the PD level. And there it is the same. Let's specify what teachers do. Let's develop a PD design, and then the specification and the structure of the learning content is an important outcome of the project. For design research on the classroom level, it's the mathematical and the language learning content. For the teachers, it can be something like I showed you, this map of jobs that a teacher has to do, the categories that a teacher has to use. And also for the teachers, there are some design principles. For example, working always very concretely with the mathematics, having a case-based approach, so working with videos from classrooms, with extracts, with students' products, are design principles that we can explore in our concrete work. And of course, the outcome of such a design research work can be a concrete PD course setting. In order to achieve this, we need research that really analyzes the learning processes of the teachers in order to contribute to our knowledge about how teachers are learning. What are the typical pathways and what are the typical obstacles on this learning pathway? And how a specific design element that I bring in the PD can work or not work, and which conditions of success we have for this. So this is a powerful research format on the classroom level as well as on the teacher level. And yeah, perhaps you want to continue asking questions about the PD on the teacher level?
Well, I have one more question now.
Okay.
Also related to size in terms of the how to reach more teachers. Well, thinking in Germany is a big country, but Brazil is much bigger. So if you do the research and then you do the professional development with some teachers, how do you get scaled? How can you, do you have some experience on that, or do you have some thoughts on, okay, I do something here, because that's one of the problems we are facing here in the work we are doing at the Unicamp. We do a lot of professional development with some teachers, but now the difficulty is to how can we go to other places and make sure, well, at least minimize the distortions of the work we do here when it goes in a larger scale. And the fact that we have now the COVID, it's an opportunity. Unfortunately, it's an opportunity to use the technology as we are doing now. But well, the scale problem is something that is worrying us on how to keep the quality and make it scalable.
Yeah, that is our challenge as well. I mean, Brazil is, I think, 4 times bigger, but the problem is the same. There are much more teachers than we can work with ourselves. So what we were trying to do in the DZLM, Deutsches Zentrum Lehrerbildung Mathematik, so our National Center for Teacher Education in Mathematics, is to learn from the classroom level and bring it to the next level. The classroom level has a certain complexity. There is the mathematical content, there are the students, there are the teachers. And when we try to influence this didactical triangle here, an important way to influence this is to bring in classroom resources. So we are writing textbooks, we are writing teaching units as open educational resources, and we influence what's happening on the classroom level by these resources. When we do PD, as long as we only work with some teachers, we can be concentrated on the didactical triangle between the facilitator who does the PD, the teacher, and the teacher content. And if the facilitator is very experienced, he can do everything spontaneously. If I do a new PD, very much spontaneous work. And I can do that because I have a lot of experience and a lot of things in mind. But if I want other facilitators to do that, they need the support. And they need the support on the level of the teacher PD resources. So meanwhile, we invest as much energy on developing teacher PD resources as we invest on developing classroom resources. What does that mean? Of course, we also go for qualifying facilitators, so taking a third step of considering the facilitators as the learners and giving them something to learn and do everything there. But one main thing is for the scaling up, to develop teacher PD resources. So the little video clips, the little activities, the background knowledge they need for some input, they all are needed for the scaling up, because so in Germany we have about 1,000 facilitators for mathematics professional development. We cannot work with all of them alone. We need to give them something they can do in their field. And that's something we have invested into, and we have this third level, the facilitator PD level, which we try to professionalize more and more. As I said, it's about 1,000 people in Germany who do mathematics professional development, and we try to qualify them for their jobs. Again, we need to find out, what does a facilitator have to learn? How can I make him learn? What are the resources? And we try to use the same things. We try to use some video clips from the teacher PD to discuss how the content is relevant here and work on that. If you are interested in the processes of scaling up, the papers will be published soon. We are just about to finalize some things about the scaling up processes. And it's not easy. What's usually happening in Germany with the facilitator education is, it is completely generic. They learn about how to use PowerPoint, they learn about how to have a nice relation to the teachers, but they do not learn about the teacher PD content. And this does not work. It's the same thing as on this level. In the PD of the teachers, we need to talk about mathematics, and must not forget the mathematical content. In the facilitator PD, we need to talk about what the facilitators have to, what the teachers have to learn, and really focus on sensitizing for that, so that they can learn to notice teachers' learning pathways, etc.
Okay, thank you. Because my question is based also on a recent experience we had here in Brazil.
Tell me about the experience.
Because in August and September we had several workshops for teachers, and we work with around 2,500 teachers. But it's just a workshop, so it's something for 2 to 3 hours synchronous, and then some previous work on that the teachers need to do.
But if you work with 2,000 teachers at the same time?
No. It worked in the total was around.
In the total. Okay. Oh, wow. Yeah.
Even though it's a huge, some groups were too big. So, but it's something that we have done using the technologies. And one of the problems, as you mentioned, is with the educators with a lot of experience, it's quite easy to do it. But when the teacher trainers or the educators are not so experienced in doing the training, even if they are experienced teachers, so being a teacher is not the same as being a teacher trainer.
Yes.
it's quite difficult to move from the kind of discussions that are usual here in the context, which is much focus on pedagogy and forgetting the maths. So that's one of the problems. As you mentioned, being able to work with the PowerPoint, using the technologies, relate with the teachers, but not focusing on what the research actually shows that the PD needs to focus on.
So this is in a completely newly emerging field of action, not only of research, also of development. Many people who have been working on PD research for the last years have realized that these facilitators here are so crucial for the scaling up processes, and we need much more research about what they have to learn and how they can learn it, so that we can really improve the quality of PD in scale. Yeah.
Yeah, because I asked that because one of the problems we have around here is that the facilitators are chosen by the price.
By the price?
Yeah, meaning the cheapest is the one who wins, will be the facilitator. So,
okay.
And there are a lot of programs for private companies that do the professional development. That they do what they say. They can say that they do what you show us, that they have some documents for the facilitators to follow, but it's just a textbook with the sequences and the kind of things that they are supposed to do with the teachers, and the teachers need to do with the students. So it's
okay, so
direct transposition.
Yeah, then I gave the wrong emphasis. Then you would say we have these teacher PD resources, but we don't have this tetrahedron of qualifying facilitators working on this level. So this is what you will need then. Okay. Yeah, interesting. So
no, it's good. Okay. It's good to hear you talking about the work you are doing in Germany. So we have we can have a broader view, both on the research and on the PD programs. So we can actually learn more and learn with the ones who actually work. Okay?
And I mean, I'm totally aware that you are highly involved in the teacher PD, but I want to advertise that for doing good teacher PD, it needs to be grounded in good research on the classroom tetrahedron and in good development on the classroom level as well, because otherwise it's always abstracted away, as Milena mentioned. Yeah.
Yeah, that's also a gap we feel that exists in the teachers training, both initial and continuous. The lack of the relationship with the classroom practices. So it's something we still need to work more on, thinking on what is actually training teachers, what is actually doing mathematics education in terms of the training the teachers and work with the teachers for helping them and work with them to have a real professional development that impacts on practice and on students' learning.
So it's interesting with this screen share. It allows me opening many documents that you see immediately. So this might be another article that is of interest, which is again really grounded in good teaching material, which is very near to the mathematics learning, and then of course is also community based, etc., etc. But we are convinced that we need that before we can really make a difference in mathematics classrooms. Are there other questions?
I'm looking at the YouTube. No, just good comments on your presentation and on the discussion. Do you have something that you want to share with us for closing?
I only share the very last slide, which is simply the first side. I can imagine that also in Brazil, increasing equity is a major concern. And if it is a major concern, it is worth to work through the role of language for mathematics teaching and learning. And as Milena has said, if this is specific for what you have done so far, I really encourage you to take the mathematics serious. The language is only one lens, but unpacking what is to be learned in mathematical respects, in my view, is very important to improve the quality of classroom teaching, to professionalize the teachers for their job, because only then we can really specify how instruction can be designed. I hope I have also advertised why this idea of conducting design experiments, putting the video camera on the situation and analyzing it in detail might be a good research format for really getting there and for achieving this. If this is interesting for you, you might find a lot of interesting ideas in the different papers I've just shown up and the papers of many other people. I am convinced that the discussion about equity must not stay on the level of the general philosophizing, but need to be grounded in the very concrete work of very concrete students and teachers. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanne. Can you just stop presenting so our faces appear in...
Yeah.
Okay. So just thank you, Susanne, for the presentation and for the discussion. It's always a pleasure to hear you. I don't know if Samuel wants to say something. If the sound works. But Samuel is the... we are co-organizing the seminar. So I'm working on the Faculty of Education and Samuel is working on the Math department. And we are trying to make things together in order to actually discuss a bit more on how to improve the teacher training and the research on teachers. So it's important for us to make it that connection. So thank you, Susanne, for having you here in Brazil.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure to come to Brazil like that. It's easier than usual.
Hopefully next time, or one of the next times, we will come in person.
This would have been even nicer, of course.
Yeah. Okay, and hope to see you in a short period of time. I already invited all the people to go to CIEspMat because for me it's one of the best conferences in the world. The place where we actually can have interactions and discussions, and it was where we actually met. So
yeah, definitely. No, I can cordially invite you. CIEspMats are really the best place to be for getting into the international communication. It's not just a conference where people deliver their talks, but it's about the communication and collaboration between different people from many different countries. Although it's a European conference, we are attracting increasingly people from all over the world, and we have had to postpone it from February 21 to February 22, and let's keep the fingers crossed that in February 22 all this crazy situation is forgotten.
Yep. Okay, so thank you, Susanne, once more, and we will continue the seminar on the afternoon with another talk from a Brazilian colleague.
Wonderful. I wish you a very good conference and hope it was useful too.
Yes, it was very nice. Thank you.
Thank you for the nice question. It was interesting.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
See you. Bye-bye. Bye.